a chance, if you're out in the foyer, please come in and we'll get started. I want to mention we have this nice program that's been started. We're thankful to Andrew Clark, who I see out there in the foyer, who helped put together this program. He was in charge of it, and many others have helped. We have index here, or scanning any documents you might have of Ezra T. Clark and his wives or their children. And we have that kindex.org, EzraTClarkkindex.org, that you can go to, and you can see what we have as far as historical documents that we put up there. As you know, we have a lunch at the park afterwards, about 4 blocks south here on Main Street. And I hope you'll come and enjoy some food on us, because we're providing the food. And you can just come and enjoy. Our treasurer, Richard Clark, is out there at the table by where they're registering. If anyone would like to make donations to family organizations, that's always welcome. So we appreciate anyone who feels like they'd like to do that. So let's go ahead and get started. We're going to have sing this hymn, Come Ye Saints, page 30, from the hymn book. To get started, we're grateful to Diane Clark, who will be leading us, and Ellen Clark, who's been giving us prelude, and will accompany. And after that, we will have Lewis Clark offer the opening prayer. Now, as is tradition with the Ezra T. Clark family, we'll also have someone read the testimony of Ezra T. Clark. And that will be Aaron Young, who is up here with us, one of our cousins. So let's go ahead, Beth.
When you reign, oh, Lord, to you. T. Clark and of his wives. We are grateful also for the Stevenson family members who have joined us here today. We are thankful for the bounteous blessings that have come to us. Many of these blessings we owe in part to those who have gone before. We are grateful for the heritage that we have in our lives. We are grateful for this beautiful setting that we have to meet in for this Pioneer Memorial Chapel. We are grateful for thy hand in our lives and in all things, and pray for thy Spirit to be with us throughout these events and activities today. We pray these things in the name of Jesus Christ. Amen. Amen.
Well, welcome, cousins. First time here. This is what happens when you go buy a book from David. He gets your name and he remembers it and he calls you the next week. So I'm happy to be here. I'm a descendant through Joseph Smith Clark. My grandmother Iris is his youngest daughter, who is one of the twins. Iris is buried up here in the cemetery. Her twin brother is buried in California. So it's a privilege to be here. I've never been in this chapel, but I can feel the heritage and I can feel the spirit that's in this wonderful building. I've been asked to read Ezra's testimony, and I wanted to just tell you quickly, I came across this testimony after my mission. Being the youngest of the youngest of the youngest, clear at the end, not many things were going on when I was growing up, at least that I remember. But I felt a deep, just desire to seek out my ancestors. And it's a really funny story that I spent weeks looking for that green gold book, that one that's out on the table. I searched everywhere. I found it. I was up at the university. I found access to it through the old computer systems, and I ended up buying it in a bookstore down on Main Street in Salt Lake. Only to find out that when I got home and showed my mom, I was so proud of myself. She said, "Well, that's in the front library." It's down in the corner. But I found it. I read this testimony, and it had a profound impact on me. And so I'm honored to be able to read his words and to share his testimony, especially as I have 3 of my 5 children here. It is so important that they, as they take that baton, understand the testimony of Ezra. It begins, "Before I left on Nauvoo, I heard the prophet Joseph Smith say he would give the saints a key whereby they would never be led away or deceived. And that was, the Lord would never suffer a majority of his people to be led away or deceived by impostors, nor would he allow the records of this church to fall in the hands of the enemy. I heard Joseph say this, and I also heard him say that he would roll the burden of the apostleship upon the quorum of the 12. I heard Joseph preach many times, heard him in the last sermon he ever delivered, bear testimony to the truth of the work of God that God had called him to do. Also that the Lord had never suffered him to be slain by his enemies, because his work had not been done until a short time ago. He had now laid the foundation of this work and rolled the burden of the priesthood upon the 12. And having given them their washings and anointings, they would now bear off this work triumphantly, and it would roll on faster than ever before. And if the Lord was willing to accept of him, he was willing to go. This he spoke to the people. I was one who heard his voice, and know that he spoke like an angel from heaven. I never heard him speak with more power than then, and heard him many times. I was satisfied. I knew him to be a prophet of God. I had heard him prophesy many times, and had seen his prophecies fulfilled, and had also shaken hands with him, and he had blessed me, and had felt the influence of the power of the Lord upon him and upon me. And I have never forgotten the blessings from that day to this, and I never shall. 2 days later, the prophet was martyred, and 2 or 3 weeks later, when the saints held a conference, and Brigham Young arose as leader of the church, I want to bear record that he spoke as Joseph used to speak. To all appearances, the same voice, the same gestures, the same stature. I bear this record to all the world, to my children, to my children's children, and also bear record that the work is God's work, and that it will roll on as it is done from that day to this. I have never turned my face away, and have always had delight in keeping the counsel of his servants in every particular. I have had many privations, and had many trying scenes traveling on the plains and on the desert. And I know that those men who have stood at the head of this church are men of God, and also the men who now stand at the head, and they will bear off this work triumphantly. And I say to my children and to my grandchildren, if they will do right and keep the commandments of God, no good thing shall be withheld from them. And they shall have testimony that God set up this work, and it will grow forth. And those who will help it stand, and those who will fight against it, will fall and crumble with the wicked. I bear testimony and leave it for the benefit of my children, my children's children, for I realize I have but a short time to live upon this earth. I have passed my 77th year, and it's been a pleasure to me to be associated during that time with the prophet and apostles, and those whom I have known were men holding the holy Melchizedek priesthood. I bear this testimony and wish it written, that my children and my children's children may know that I have finished my work, and I bear this testimony before them and all the world in the name of the Lord, even so, Jesus Christ. Amen. So the testimony goes on for many pages, as many of you are familiar with. And so David wanted me to talk about a couple of things that are in here. Under paragraph 2, it says, in order that unity has prevailed in my family, and the spirit of brotherly and sisterly love may endure, I desire that a family organization may be effective and may be perpetual, that a meeting of my family, and as many as my descendants as can possibly do so, be held here once a year for the purpose of maintaining the interest of the family and for keeping a register and for mutual aid and encouragement. So I applaud you. Well done. This is my first time that it's here. It's amazing that it's here all of these years later. I think this was 1901 that this was written. And so he goes through and he sets up the organization. He starts with my great-grandfather, Joseph Smith Clark. And he says, I desire that the following shall constitute an executive committee, starting with Joseph Smith Clark, Edward B. Clark, and Amasa L. Clark, whose duty it shall be to act as arbiters in all differences and disputes that may arise among the members of my family. That the said committee and its chairman shall fix dates, ... I want to comment on this from my experience growing up in the Young family, which was very, very influenced by Iris Clark. There was never a time that we were allowed to have disputations as children growing up. We work as a family business. It is 4 brothers that we work in harmony with each other to this day. And we were taught from a very young age that we never keep track. That we do not say to each other, well, I did this for you, so you do this for me. We don't keep track of who is ahead or who is behind. My father Floyd and his brother Clark were instrumental in teaching this to their descendants. That they helped. When one was in trouble, they helped. When the other was in trouble, they stepped in. And there was no record kept of who was ahead of who. And it's a great family legacy, and I can see where that comes from with Ezra and his boys, who I know work together as we walk around this wonderful place here. Moving forward, it says, I'm impressed in this evening of life to admonish my family of the importance of devoting some measure of their time to temple work. And it's my wish that a genealogy record be prepared to include as many of my ancestors as it is possible to get information about. And when this record shall have been compiled, it is my earnest wish that I may have as often as possible a representative in one of the holy temples of my Heavenly Father to perform work of the dead. My small memories of Iris are her having a microfiche machine in her apartment up the hill from the Salt Lake Temple. Those are my memories. That she would go down, they knew her in the temple, she would take a disc, they would allow her to take it home, which boggles my mind, and she would be doing genealogy work. This is in the 1970s and early 80s. I admonish that those who are strong Be thoughtful and helpful to those who are weaker. I trust that it shall never occur to any member of my family that any one of them shall ever be justified in taking undue advantage of another. I warn my family against this spirit of dissension and command them to a spirit of fairness, justice, impartiality towards one another. I plead for the weak, because the strong will take care of themselves, and those who cherish the memory of their father to honor the name he has given them in life, that they will feel the responsibility that they are under, and all members of this organization should protect one another's good name and avoid any unseemly gossip. Be charitable, helpful, patient, kind, loving towards one another, and God will sustain you and your families as he has sustained me and mine. It's almost like you could see our day, where all of these things have just flown out the window, where none of that seems to be important in our organizations anymore, but it was here. While it has been my privilege, because of the natural endowments with which God hath clothed me, to accumulate something of this world's goods, I would not have my family suppose that I esteem money as I esteem honor, virtue, and above all other things, fidelity in the Church of Christ. And I trust that no one of my family will ever seek and appreciate the treasures of this world among the treasures that have come from an honorable and a God-fearing life devoted to religious duties and the obligations which men owe one another and their God. I want to bear my testimony of how grateful I am for our ancestors, how grateful I am that this is part of my heritage. I didn't realize where it came from, but this is how I was raised, to not esteem the things of this world above the things of God, to help brothers and sisters, to look out for those that are struggling and who are weak. Is Grandpa. It's amazing. And I bear my testimony that this work will roll forth, and do so in the name of Jesus Christ. Amen.
Thank you so much, Aaron, for your testimony and sharing that of our ancestry. And we'll get to learn today a little bit more about our ancestors. I'm sure that Ezra inherited and learned some of this from his own heritage. We're going to learn a little bit more later today about the tour that's been prepared for us in October for those who would like to spend some time and some money to go back east. We're back from Connecticut, so we'll have time for that. Just for a couple minutes though, I do want to recognize some of the families that are here. Now, as you know, we are sharing this reunion with the Stevensons. Now, we don't have the best connection with a full Stevenson family, all the descendants of Joseph and Elizabeth Stevenson, who are the parents of Mary Stevenson, which is Ezra T. Clark's first wife. So we don't have extensive connections with all of them as far as being able to contact them. But luckily, we have Chris Stevenson is here, and he's able to contact a part of his family, one of the great-grandchildren of Joseph Stevenson. And so we know we have a few from their family. But just to recognize who's here, I would like to first ask if, I'm going to start out with, are there any Clark relatives here that are not descendants of Ezra T. and are not descendants of Laura Phelps Clark? Any other Clark relatives? I thought we might have one. I had one from contact me recently from a descendant of Nathan Clark. I'm not talking about Nathan George Clark. I'm talking about the brother of Timothy Baldwin Clark and wanted a book. So the influence is going back another generation and then down. So who do we have here from, anyone from Laura Clark Phelps family? Go ahead and stand. And I know we had Judy Weber here earlier. They were on their way to Logan and they stopped by for a minute. We appreciate you being here, joining with us. Now I'd like to see people, how many do we have here that are Stevensons that aren't descendants of Mary Stevenson, but are other descendants of Joseph? Okay, and we have a hand in the back as well. So we have some, and we're grateful for you to be our cousins. I'd like to add to that, because it doesn't like we have too many Stevensons, but how many of you here are descendants of Mary Stevenson? Go ahead and stand up. So we have a lot of Stevensons here. It's good to know that. And we're going to learn a little bit more about the Stevensons and our Stevenson heritage there, because it's close to much of our family. And now I'd also like to recognize those who are descendants of Ezra T. Clark and Susan Leggett. Please stand up. Thank you. Thank you for coming. So, important parts of our family, all of you, and we appreciate your support and joining in with us. I had a comment earlier this morning that we have a lot of great people who have served as senior missionaries, even when it's been back to the UN in Switzerland, helping out there, and those who've been helping people that need temple service throughout the world. I'm sure there's lots of types of service. Just really quickly, those who have served a senior mission, would you stand up for a moment? I want to recognize you for your service. We appreciate you. That's a lot of you. I don't know, my brother and sister-in-law are out there collecting money. They are too. They're serving the mission right now. We'll go on with our program. We will have a little break here in a little while, and remember that we do have lunch afterwards at the park, so we'll be wanting to be there by 12:30. But for right now, what we have is, is Kimball Clark here? Yeah. Oh, there. Got a look right now. Okay, he's my nephew. I'm proud of him and my niece, Kathy Gilmore, who may be out with the scanning material. They, with their love of family and history and their ancestors, they created a company that many can enjoy called Kindex.org. And they've been helpful to many people, as well as to our family organization, the Ezra T. Clark Family Organization. We've used their services to store family records online that everybody can access, not only to read, but to help index, transcribe. I'm going to turn the time over to him, and he's going to give us an update on our archive. And after him, we'll hear about that tour I've been talking about. We'll have Richard Lambert come up and tell us about the tour in October.
Okay, thank you, David. So, I just want to begin by introducing myself. My name is Kimball Clark. I am through Mary Stevenson and Ezra T. and on down from there. David's actually my uncle. My father is Charles Clark. I grew up in the Ezra T. Clark home with a lot of brothers and one sister, the same number that Ezra T. raised in that home, which is very interesting. Does anybody know who that man is? What was that? Okay.
But he founded, I think, was it Tuskegee?
Yes. Okay, great. So Booker T. Washington was actually, he had a white parent and a black parent, and he was treated as a slave. And I read his autobiography called Up From Slavery. Very fascinating read. If you ever get a chance to read it, I recommend it. We're going to review some of his quotes today. More than once, I have tried to picture myself in the position of a boy or man with an honored and distinguished ancestry which I could trace back through a period of hundreds of years, and who had not only inherited a name, but a fortune and a proud family homestead. And yet, I have sometimes had the feeling that if I had inherited these and had been a member of a more popular race, I should have been inclined to yield to the temptation of depending upon my ancestry and my color to do that for me which I should do for myself. Years ago, I resolved that because I had no ancestry myself, I would leave a record of which my children would be proud and which might encourage them to still higher effort. So he talks here about the difficulty of himself as a youth not being able to rely on his ancestry for his future because he didn't know his ancestry. So here's another quote that I thought was really good. These are a little long, I apologize, but they're profound. The influence of ancestry, however, is important in helping forward any individual or race if too much reliance is not placed upon it. Those who constantly direct attention to the Negro youth's moral weaknesses and compare his advancement with that of white youths do not consider the influence of the memories which cling about the old family homesteads. I have no idea, as I have stated elsewhere, who my grandmother was. I have or have had uncles and aunts and cousins, but I have no knowledge as to where most of them are. My case will illustrate that of hundreds of thousands of black people in every part of our country. The very fact that the white boy is conscious that if he fails in life, he will disgrace the whole family record, extending back through many generations, is of tremendous value in helping him to resist temptations. The fact that the individual has behind and surrounding him proud family history and connection serves as a stimulus to help him to overcome obstacles when striving for success. Isn't that profound? That resonated with me as I began working on Kindex, that we do have a pretty impressive heritage, and it's not to compare ourselves with other races, but more so be grateful for what many of us have. Now here's another quote that I've always thought about as I've been building this software. Did I not like as one crying from the dead, yea, even as one speaking from the dust. So let me explain to you an experience that we had 2017 with the reunion. And is Ralph Clark here? Is he still with us? Okay. I don't know where Ralph is, but Ralph came in 2017, and one of the older descendants of the Clarks is still living, and he had a whole bundle of envelopes. And let me pull that up here. Internet's a little slow here, but he had a whole grundle of envelopes, and he's inside of each envelope there was a letter. There were some documents that were eaten by vermin. There were some poetry, and it was a whole bunch of documents that Ruth Bentley had kept. Any relation? Anybody have a relation to Ruth Bentley in here? A close relation? Okay. So, are any of you Ruth's children by chance? Okay, because I was wondering if any of you could recognize the handwriting on some of that. So anyway, we had these documents from Ruth that she had literally just put on her dresser, at the very top of her dresser for years. And when she passed away, somehow they fell into Ralph's hands. And guess what was in those letters? Some incredible documents. We have letters from Ezra James Clark while he was a missionary. We have letters from Mary Stevenson to Ezra, and from Ezra to Mary Stevenson. We have a lot of interesting poetry from an ancestor. I can't remember her name right now. Maybe Andrew could remind me. So we scanned those in 2017, and we put them on what we call the Kindex archive. Okay, so what you see right now is the Kindex archive. Let me see if I can shrink that down a little bit for you. So what this basically is it's a transcription service. So you can upload your original document here on the left, and you can transcribe it there on the right. And once it's transcribed, it gets submitted into a database that can be keyword searched. So this is the ezratclark.kindex.org archive. And this has several documents, photos, journals, whatever you want to be placed on here and sourced so that you can search the words of your ancestors. So here we have a letter that's not been transcribed from Ezra James Clark, and it's a mission letter. And let's see if we can just read this.
Show the date.
What was that?
Show the date.
The date? It's like 1865, I think. September 23rd, 1865. Dear Father, Mothers, brother and sister, I take this favorable opportunity to write to you. I am well and have been have been ever since I came here. Anyway, it continues, okay? I don't know what's even written in this letter. I'd like your help, okay? There might be some gems in these documents. There are 87 documents that Ralph gave us in 2017 that need to be transcribed. Like I say, some of it's poetry, some of it's letters. We really don't know which is the subsequent page, okay? We just have a whole bunch of letters that are scattered, so we still have to transcribe them and then try to knit them together and figure out which page. So if you would like to participate in this transcription effort, we would very much appreciate it. We're not charging money for that at all. David Clark is the owner of this archive, and he has the ability to allow anybody access to this archive that he thinks is not going to destroy the archive. Okay, so he can do really whatever. He has the powers or the controls over this archive to allow people in and get people out. Okay, so if you would like to participate, the website is ezratclark.kindux.org. Oh, there we go. It just shows it right up there on the screen. Okay, ezratclark.kindux.org, and I'm going to end by this quote by Elder Shane M. Bowen of the 70. I testify that the veil is thin. The same feelings of loyalty, love, and family unity don't end as our loved ones pass to the other side. Instead, those feelings are intensified. Now, I would agree with that statement. There are a lot of personal experiences in my life, and this is a way that we can learn from our ancestors, learn from our sometimes parents who passed, is simply transcribing their words from their letters, their journals, or describing their images. And like I say, David can give you access if you request it. You can have free access. You can help us in this transcription project. Of course, if you want to do this with your own family, you can certainly do that and be an archive owner, just as Dave is an archive owner, but that's a cost that we can talk about later. I'm not selling anything today. I'm just wanting to present to you this opportunity to help with the Ezra T. Clark records. So I would invite you to consider what's in your closet and bring those forward to forthcoming reunions. If you have access to them soon, we could scan those and transcribe those and put them on the archive. The organization, since I've been in it, one of the primary reasons why we have the money that we have is for historical purposes. It was used in your publication, is that not correct? It was used a little bit in the creation of the Kindux software, so its intent is for that purpose. So please scavenge your closets, scavenge your drawers, under your beds, Uncle David, you know what I'm talking about, and bring your documents and get them transcribed or scanned, of course, and then digitized, and then we can transcribe them as a group and in turn make those connections to our ancestors and learn from them. And I say these things in the name of Jesus Christ, amen.
Brothers and sisters and family members, it's great to be here, and already from Aaron's remarks and from Kimball's remarks, if I just went home right now, I'd be richly rewarded for just the time of being here. I was just thinking, as I sat here with, many of us have taken the 23andMe or the Ancestry.com to see where our biological roots are, and it's an interesting exercise to do. But I was thinking, what about our spiritual DNA? The things that have given us our faith and our testimony, those things that have contributed to that most rich aspect of our lives. And as I've thought back of that driving here, I think an awful lot of it comes from this very place that we're in right now, this rock chapel, where Ezra T. and Mary, Susan worshiped, where they raised their children. My grandmother was born right down the street on Clark Lane. Eliza Avery Clark, a daughter of Hiram, Don Carlos Clark, and Ann Eliza Porter. As I think about my own spiritual heritage, I think about where I was taught the value of prayer, the fact that God answers our prayers. I've had a mother who had an absolute assurance of that. And where did she get it? Well, she got it from her mother, Avery. And Avery obviously got it from her parents. And that's been such a big part of my whole life, now trying to pass it on to our children and grandchildren. And we can probably trace it back. This past weekend, we had a family wedding, and I was in Nauvoo, Illinois, and I was thinking today of Ezra T. I think he was only 18 years old when in 1841 or 42, he goes up to the temple site. It's just starting to come forth. And Joseph is pitching the saints. He's trying to sell the saints on opening up their purses and their pocketbooks and contributing something to the construction of the temple. And this 18-year-old ancestor of many of us is standing there in the audience. And he had all of his worldly possessions and money in his pocket. Someone can tell me how much that was. I think it was like $18 or something. But that was a lot of money for a young man in that period of time. And Joseph said, "Can you please contribute whatever you can afford or whatever you have?" And at the end of that request by the prophet Joseph, Ezra says, I went up to Joseph and basically handed him all of my world's goods and possession. And he said, Joseph blessed me right there on the spot and said, "Young man, the Lord bless you, and you will never want for this world's goods and for money in your life." And I think Aaron just read it. He said the promise and the blessing of the prophet Joseph on that occasion has stuck with me throughout my life. And we know that he received that great blessing. And I was just thinking today, and I tried to write this down, many of us have been well acquainted with those who have touched the hands of men and women who knew and touched the hand of the prophet Joseph Smith. When we were in Nauvoo, I was thinking of my great-great-grandmother, Mary Alice. And Mary Alice came to Nauvoo when she was 14 years old from Liverpool, England. And she was well acquainted with the prophet Joseph Smith. He was there to greet her and her family when they got off the Maid of Iowa there at the landing in Nauvoo. And she knew the prophet and heard him and knew him well. Well, she lived till 1920. My dad, her great-grandson, was well acquainted with her. He was born in 1905. So he was 15 years old before she passed away. Now, many of us have, on our different lines, that same kind of experience. And I think because we grew up with family members who had that kind of connection with the early history of the church, we were very blessed. Church history for them, by and large, wasn't a challenge, a test, a trial. It was a testimony. They knew the people who had been intimately involved in these early church experiences and had come through it with strong, powerful testimonies that committed their lives to it. They put their lives where their faith was, or where their mouths were. And I'm afraid that we're seeing a bit of a transition right now. For some reason, people have picked apart little aspects of church history, kind of taken out of the context, and all of a sudden church history has become a challenge for many of our young people. Whereas for me, who spent a lifetime studying and reading the journals, it's the very center of my faith. And I then have experienced many of the same kinds of miracles and experiences that my ancestors had experienced. But I was able to do so because I had their example. They experienced it. Ezra had experienced it. And Mary Alice had experienced it. And I knew that I could experience it. So I think it's really important, brothers and sisters, that to the degree that we can, those of us who have been the beneficiaries of those acquaintances with our grandparents and our great-grandparents, that we now share this with our grandchildren and great-grandchildren and our children. Tell them the stories. Well, one of the ways we can do it is to actually go back and reestablish our connection with the past. And it's been my experience over the years, having done a lot of it as a volunteer guide, an unpaid volunteer guide for the last 25 or so years, that one of the best ways to establish that connection with those who have gone before is to go back and visit the sites, to establish a physical connection with the places from which our ancestors have come. And I personally believe that, from my experience, that when we make the effort, the sacrifice to go back and establish those connections, that our ancestors are well aware of what we're doing. And if we're ready, we'll have faith-promoting, bonding experiences for us as we do this. It's a real thing, and we'll experience that. Well, this trip in October is going to be just a great trip. It's kind of a split trip. It's a Clark family trip going back to Deacon George in Milford. And I'm hoping, Charles, that we might be able to actually erect, I don't think he has a gravestone. Does he? And just a marking on the bridge that said he lived here along with some of our other ancestors, the Baldwins. But we're hoping to maybe do something on this trip to leave a memory of him. The other thing is that we're going to, Charles Clark, a modest man, has compiled a wonderful history of the early Clark family. I mean, we'll see the river, the Ohio River, where they put in and then traveled 550 miles down the river in their quest to establish a good place for their family. This is before the gospel founded, but that's where they were headed, though they didn't fully know it. And we're going to have and see all of those sites. We're going to see them at what I believe is the most beautiful part of the year for New England and for Ohio. We're going to be there at that great autumn time with the world's leading expert, living expert on this aspect. Please don't, I'm sorry for embarrassing you, Charles, but it's just as the Clarks would say, it's the gospel truth. And then we're going to combine that with, I think, an absolutely first-rate church history trip. We're going to visit Harmony, Pennsylvania. Just a few years ago, President Nelson dedicated the new restored and rebuilt site there. And in his new book, Insights, President Nelson said, of all my apostolic responsibilities and experiences, the dedication of this priesthood restoration site ranks perhaps right at the very top. He's dedicated lands for the preaching of the gospel, and so many other things. But he rated his experience there in Harmony as one of the highlights of his apostolic ministry. We'll go there almost within 200 years of the first vision. Will be in Manchester and Palmyra. The first vision's 200th anniversary is coming up in just a little over a year. We're going to be there, and then we're going to have and Mendon and some other great places. That we'll go to Colesville. We'll see where Joseph and Emma were married and where they spent their honeymoon and where Joseph spent about a year of his life. We're then going to Kirtland, Ohio, where we're going to have I think, unparalleled teaching experience and learning experience of spending a day and a half with Carl Ricks Anderson, who's become a dear friend of mine and some of yours. He's Mr. Kirtland. He's the former stake president there who helped rebuild Kirtland. He's the patriarch there now. He wrote the books Joseph Smith's Kirtland and The Savior in Kirtland at the request of Elder Neil L. Maxwell. He's been the guide of prophets and apostles through the years, and he's going to take us personally, not on some kind of standard guide where you're 2 minutes in the School of the Prophets room. You're there for a half hour, 45 minutes in the School of the Prophets room where the Father and the Son appeared. We're going to be in the Kirtland Temple just with Carl, having an experience maybe for an hour or more, being with him there, and the John Johnson Farm where the great vision explaining the doctrine of salvation was given to Joseph and Sidney Rigdon. Up in there with general authorities at the foot of Carl Anderson in those very places, and they, like I, were just so edified and blessed by learning from this great teacher and having a spiritual experience in the process. It was with Elder Todd Christofferson, and it was one of the greatest teaching experiences or learning experiences of my life. I've taken enough time, and I apologize if I've gone over. Let me just say that if you can't make it yourself, get a family member to come. It's going to be a lifetime memory, and I believe a life-changing memory for everybody that comes. And let me just bear my testimony in this sacred place and my appreciation. I'm so grateful for those Clark and Stevenson ancestors who came before and were so valiant. I love them. I can't wait. Well, I can't wait to get to the other side, to embrace them and tell them, thank you so much for what you did and for the example you set. I know the gospel's true. I know these things are real. And I say this in the name of Jesus Christ. Amen. Amen.
Thank you so much, Richard. I was just talking there for a minute because we do have, on the program, you notice that Andrew was going to talk to us a little bit about letters about Mary and Ezra. But he ended up being involved with the children upstairs, and he does such a great job helping them to, at their level, to understand some pioneer heritage. So we're just checking quick. We might not go through that part, but what that was is going to be an example of how, as Kimball explained earlier, people bring in documents they have, and we find more letters that maybe we didn't know about, and we learn more about our ancestors. And those letters, even if we don't have Andrew available to present them to us, if you go to ezratclark.index.org, pardon? Yeah, .index.org. You can get on there and look at them. And if you want to be able to upload your own stuff, like he said, you can put in a request and it'll come to me and I'll let you in. But anybody can just get in there at that address and look them up. And other documents that might be there. So, we have some presentations coming up here that we're looking forward to. In just a minute, we'll have Chris Stevenson. He is the, I don't know if you call it the owner or manager of the Stevenson genealogy store down at BYU that a number of you might be familiar with. But he's our Stevenson cousin to so many of us, and he's going to give us a demonstration, a presentation on the Stevenson heritage that we have. And after him, we'll have A. Charles Clark talk about a little bit more about the Clark and Stevenson relationship. And of course, Charles Clark's the one that's been the one to do the research for many years and produce that Timothy Baldwin Clark book, which we've been selling for the last couple of years. And, you know, we only have about 80 left, so. And we have some out here, they've been going. I had to replenish the pile of books out there if anyone's wanting to buy some. I'll just mention also that we have a couple things out there. There's the old Ezra T. Clark, His Ancestors and Descendants book that was, the second edition was published back in the 70s. We still have some of them, if I remember right, I forgot that right, that date. There's a few of those left out there, and they're available to be purchased.